Frederik Severin Grundtvig, Part 3. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today's presentation on Grundtvig will focus mainly on Grundtvig's School of Education and his view on schooling in the first place. We have a little proverb here for you. Education may seriously affect your brain. That is a proverb I like intensely. It's actually the official proverb of Aalborg University to get people to study in the first place. And to me, it's one of the few headlines and focus lines that focuses on the person rather on the competition. If you go here and you educate yourself, you will come out at the other end with a changed soul, a changed brain, a changed you. What does education today actually mean? Well, education today, so it seems, is a direct result of UNESCO and OECD define education as something we need to standardize because the world sees an international increased competition. We compete a lot. If we want to compete, we need to be better at educating our people concurrently. But they say we need to standardize things. If we standardize education, it means that it will be easier to adapt the workforce of any country to a standardized demand of any country. So it's also a reaction to an increase in globalization, etc. So we do educate people in exactly the same way in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, France, etc., in order for the workforce to be able to migrate freely over borders and do their work wherever they see fit. The cost of that is the fear of standardization culturally and the risk of standardizing cultures along with it, which some will see as a risk. And a direct consequence of this demand for standardization is the ability to measure how does education work in various countries. And to measure this, the OECD has developed the so-called Program for International Student Assessment. We know it as the PISA tests. OECD conducts research on these 65 countries that make up 90% of the world's economy, which is quite a lot. The OECD Directorate for Education has found that student achievement in math and science are a sound indicator for future economic health. So, nations or cities with good schools perform fantastically, seen from an economic perspective, and vice versa. What is it actually a PISA test measure? It tests so-called critical thinking in math, science, and reading to students at 15 years of age. The test questions do not measure memorization of facts, but rather demand that students draw on knowledge and real-world problem-solving skills. So, you can't just say 2 + 2 is 4. You'll have it in a context, at least according to PISA and OECD. It looks as if this is a direct result of a market demand for standardization and quantification. And to me, that is the direct link to what I call the golden logic of measuring. We measure everything because measuring means we can keep an eye on, are things really going the way we want them to go? Measuring seems to have moved away from being the question towards being the answer. How are schools in Denmark? I don't know, I'll measure them. Rather than they're doing well. People like Danish students all over the world, so they must be doing something right. We don't see it like that. So if you measure things, at least you know that they are quantified or quantifiable. That is what I see the development as being today. And good old Grundtvig and later researchers, as is stated here, would not have agreed on that one. PISA according to them, is designed in order to measure. It's not designed in order to change anything. It's designed in order to measure things, which means measuring as well as grades is good for one thing only. It is the perfect tool for spanking students, according to Grundtvig, by the way. Not for measuring their abilities, but to punish them for their lack of abilities. It's almost the same with the economic system. Money does not show a country's wealth at all, actually. What we measure is the flow of money in and out of a country. We call that gross national product. This, however, has not led to the dismantling of the monetary system, since we don't have an alternative, and we're tired of dragging about goats to get milk. Measuring does not do the trick. If you measure weight, will it lead to a weight loss? If yes, I'm all in. If not, it needs to be connected to action of some sort. And I think that's a very, very fair critique point. How about UNESCO? UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Well, it came into existence November 4th, 1946, right after the Second World War. Its head office is situated in Paris. The main function of UNESCO was, and still is today, to contribute to peace and security. And they do that by promoting collaboration between nations through education, through science, and through culture. So that the different states throughout the world may respect the same values: justice, rule of law, human rights, all that, without any distinction of sex, race, language, or religion. It concentrates on developing understanding amongst nations, because if we understand each other and we roughly base each other's knowledge and education systems on the same values, there's really no reason to go to war anymore. At least that was the basic idea, how not to create the next Hitler. It encourages teaching, and it encourages on the understanding of science and the respect for science. It spreads knowledge on the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, human rights, etc. We went through that one. It exchanges experts and in various countries promote and help mass education. It helps in promoting educational standards and the enrichment of culture. Now, this last sentence, the enrichment of culture, you may debate that. They do definitely promote educational standards. And that is why UNESCO is also tied up to PISA and the OECD. And therefore it can be argued that UNESCO too is a so-called Western experiment rather than a global experiment. That is at least one of the critique points from whoever country is not Western. And they may have a point. If you look on this slide, we have to the left a description, a figure that shows about UNESCO's key values. And there's a few words here that look like something we've seen before. When you examine this figure closer, you'll see that they focus on three main areas. We have social equity, that's the blue circle. We have economic viability, that's the yellow circle. And we have environmental protection, that's the red circle. Now, the common denominator being sustainability. That's the part in the middle where the three squares meet. So, this actually looks quite well. But if you would please notice the common value between economic viability and environmental protection. It says viable. Whoa. The word is viable. What does viable mean? If you look into a dictionary, capable of success or continuing effectiveness, practicable, a viable plan, or a viable national economy, which means you construct things in a way that will make them survive. But according to which standards, one might ask. So, viable could mean that economy has predominance. And if it doesn't pay, it won't work, etc. And this seems to have a certain heavy impact on the way we think in a UN-based situation and forum. Interesting. To me, this clearly demonstrates the nearest we come to a post-Cold War economic discourse that I call the Fukuyama Bubble. Fukuyama his name was actually Francis Fukuyama. He was an American economist who made several papers following the end of the Cold War. And at least to a certain degree, introduced by the new right-wing movement of the world with Margaret Thatcher, known as Thatcherism, and Ronald Reagan, known as Reaganism. Both of these two leaders promoted the idea that societies should be run as economies, as market economies. If we look at how much it costs us to run an ambulance service, what if we say you can run ambulance services too? Then we create competition, and competition can only be healthy. Yes, because someone will prevail to the benefit of society, for the benefit of whoever uses an ambulance service. I don't think that that is the case anymore. I think posterity has clearly demonstrated that doing this is not always a good idea. Hence, I call it the Fukuyama Bubble, simply because this excluding bubble seems to still regulate the way we decide things in societies. It still is quite clearly a matter of who wins in a competition, and whoever is the victor must represent something better than the loser. Again, please notice the terms winner, loser. This is the X factor of ideologies in society. That could be a problem to us. What are the consequences of all this measuring? Well, one of the consequences seems to be stress. Well, you can't really be alarmed over that, or you can't really be baffled over that, because not only do we measure, we also seem rather keen to tell people that we measure. I have my eyes fully focused on you. I see everything you do. We believe that is motivating people. If we look at them and see what they're doing and tell them, I want you to lift this up, and if you don't do it fast enough, I will tell you. We will, in our own terms, motivate them to do this job better. We, of course, being those in power, for whom it may seem prudent to measure for those very reasons. This has strong reminiscence of the human resource school of the 1920s and 30s and the Chicago School of Economics. However, an interesting fact is that this intense pressure seems to cost much more than it actually saves. We pressure people to a degree you couldn't possibly imagine. And by doing so, we impose so much physical strain on people that they go under. They just can't take it. They bow to pressure. They get sick. So it really seems that we need to develop public management a bit further. We need to go to the next phase. We should perhaps introduce newer public management. Or, since we prefer easy-to-sell abbreviations, how about the post-NPM era? Because we need to turn the page in that book and do things differently. Not the least, since whoever invented new public management, Professor Christopher Hood, already has publicly denounced NPM. He has said quite clearly in a book of 2015, don't go there. It's way too expensive for a society to go there. It'll cost you much more than you save. And I believe that we see that already in Denmark happening. To give you a little example, in Denmark, 30,000 people are on permanent sick leave based on stress, caused by stress. Approximately 500,000 people are at the brink of joining them. That's a lot. But these people cost together a mere 14 billion kroner per annum. That's roughly 1.8 billion euros. So it's a little hard to find these huge savings that were promised to us by the worshippers of the Church of NPM. I call it that because it seems almost like a religion. I've chosen this religion. If you to call me wrong, I don't like you anymore. But the funny thing is that the facts are quite contradictory to what we do. How do we get out of this mess? If we concentrate on the education system, we have other ways of doing things. One of them being problem-based learning, PBL. Is PBL the answer? Well, perhaps PBL in a modified form, but before I get any further into that, I may want to explain what is PBL actually. You probably know already, but here we have a small run-over of the things presently occurring in the education system. We have problem-based learning to the left on this slide. We work in groups, but we still get grades. The thing about PBL is we cooperate on solving an academic problem via books, curriculum. If you move to the middle, you can see how it works on most other universities. Oh, sorry, I didn't mention PBL is one of the key education systems here at Aalborg Universities. They have adopted the Aalborg model since it doesn't really, it's not exactly the same as the originally stated PBL model, but they have adapted it to meet their own standards. But still basically is PBL. In the middle you see the curriculum-based education systems. Hello there. Here you have 1 million books. See you at the exams. That's not entirely true anymore. Many of the universities in Denmark have adapted parts of the PBL model as seen in Aalborg. So they too are into group working and have fewer lecturers, etc. And Aalborg have done the opposite. Instead of eliminating lectures, we have introduced lectures to a greater extent than we probably would have in a pure PBL model. But it's very difficult to analyze why that is happening. I think it has got to do with what we were discussing a little earlier. They're being watched. If you don't produce, and if you don't produce the way I say you must produce, you don't get any funding. So therefore, I tell you, you need more lectures, they're cheaper than group work, and you need to produce more and better grades. And you need to produce students faster. The last one is an interesting bit, but we'll get back to that in another lecture. But to the right is an interesting figure, because here again we have good old Mr. Grundtvig. What did he say? Grundtvig actually promoted conversation-based education. As you may recall from the previous lessons, he hated curriculum-based education. He didn't like education based on books. He liked what he described as the living word. And he saw that as the only way of saving education from extinction, or the rest of us for that matter. We need to sit down and talk about a scientific subject, and doing so, we transfer learning from one who knows more to someone who knows less via the oral transference of data. He may have had quite a point. The interesting bit for me is that he actually personifies what PBL would have been all about had they retained their original form. Interesting, very interesting. And that brings me to something very exciting. And I will start that by introducing to you, but you know him already, no doubt, one of the few and very predominant geniuses in the world of psychology, Lev Vygotsky. He was actually a Soviet Russian, which means he was part of a system that advocated communism and a society based on non-market economy and a non-market approach. Let's just put it like that. So he had quite a good chance of studying the effect of non-market economy on education, and he had a huge impact on the way we teach things. Good old Vygotsky, he has become the foundation of much of the research and theory in cognitive development over many decades. and particularly in what was to become known as social development theory. His theory stressed the fundamental role of social interaction and development of cognition. We cannot overrule context. Ugh. And he believed strongly that community plays a central role in the process of meaning-making. And he actually uses the phrase meaning-making. Why is that important? I'll come back to that later. Learning is necessary and a universal aspect of this process of developing culturally organized, specifically human psychological functions is learning. In other words, social learning tends to precede development. Ooh, and that's interesting because one of the very heavy theorists of the time, Monsieur Piaget, he said exactly the opposite. He said that development precedes learning. We have to develop to a certain age before which we cannot possibly absorb learning. Vygotsky said the opposite. He said we learn all the time. If you send a baby into a room and he crawls along, he bumps into a chair, he will have learned not to bump into a chair. So we learn all the time. No single principle can account for development. Individual development cannot be understood without reference to the social context and the cultural context in which it is embedded. Higher mental processes in the individual have their origin in social processes. It's as easy as that, or as complex as that, as you might say. That leads me to the next guy. That's this gentleman here. This is Jerome Bruner, another one of what I will call the psychological, theoretical geniuses of our time. Bruner, he died 2 years ago at the age of 100. And according to one of his friends, a few months before he died, he said, "I can't wait to see what lies ahead." And he made a 5-year plan. So he planned years ahead at the age of 100. I like that. He said that the outcome of cognitive development is thinking. The intelligent mind creates from experience a generic coding system that permits one to go beyond the data to new and possibly fruitful predictions. Thus, children, as they grow, must acquire a way of representing their recurrent regularities, as he called them, in their environment. It's quite simple. We bump into that chair. I don't go there. It goes bump, and I hurt myself. Later, we'll connect that knowledge to the knowledge of that being a chair. So it's all about cross-connections of knowledge, together imposing a wider understanding of the world. It's a very good observation. So to Bruner. Important outcomes of learning include not just the concepts, the categories and the problem-solving procedures invented previously by the culture, but also the ability to invent these things for oneself. So we can't take culture by the hand and go somewhere. We have to see things ourselves, hit that chair ourselves, but culture will help us identify that as being a chair and the bruise on our leg as the consequence of hitting it. So culture sort of makes the foundation of meaning-making in this world. And that is very, very good. A fantastic observation that nobody else seemed to have made, apart from Vygotsky, Bruner, and our good friend, but I'll get back to him. In his research on the cognitive development of children, Jerome Bruner proposed 3 models of representation. The inactive representation, that's the action-based thing itself. The iconic representation, images. That's iconic means image. That's the image-based representation. And the symbolic representations, that's, funnily enough, the language-based representations. And with this in mind, he invented the so-called spiral curriculum. Spiral because it's shaped like this, and a curriculum because he wanted to indicate that knowledge comes like this. Here you have a basic situation, as you see on the model, Coaching will tell you a little more. Scaffolding will help you to reach the next level. Scaffolding meaning we build a structure so you can climb. And we, that's your parents, that's the other parts of society, i.e. culture. Reflection, oh, I've learned something new, I better think about that one. Oh, that's interesting. Exploration, I want to see more. Articulation, I want to tell you what I found. So, we have conclusive articulation and reflection at the end, which means I found out something new. Here is what I found. I would like to communicate that to you and to my children. A very interesting way of seeing what actually goes on in the world. Now, and to me, that is the brilliance of Bruner, because I want to show you something interesting. Here we have Bruner again, and a picture of his learning modes, inactive, iconic, and symbolic. But look at the top left. You have another spiral. And now this spiral, any historian, or sociologist for that matter, will nod his head knowingly to this image, because it could be Bruner's spiral curriculum, but it's not. It's an image of the hermeneutic spiral, as we know it from our point of view, which does exactly the same as Bruner's. How if that isn't crossing subject method? I don't know what it is. It's a very intelligent way of including methods from other subjects than his own. And it's very well observed. As I show you here is a small portion of the previous slide, because I want to emphasize what he also emphasizes. The world is all about meaning making. What am I bumping into? Something hard. Later, something hard which I know is a chair. Later, I will evade it because I know I'm going to hit myself in 15 seconds. So it's all about meaning making. That's what constitutes man and society. Hence what we call cultural psychology. And this is the fact according to Bruner, according to Vygotsky, and according to the man in the middle, good old Grundtvig. And this, ladies and gentlemen, to me, represents true brilliance. Imagine Grundtvig sitting in his chair in the 1800s, thinking, something is elementary wrong here. I can't really put my finger on it, but something is really wrong. It doesn't really work. And suddenly it dawns on him. It must have to do with words. Words, storytelling, the spoken word, the living word. We need to be taught with words and in groups. We need to be educated together via social education in a given context. And it's a culturally specified context. Now, that is quite incredible, because these exact words might have all been spoken by Mr. Vygotsky or Mr. Bruner. Now, that is interesting. To me as a scholar, it has been incredibly exciting to discover this trinity, as I call it, of the cultural psychology. I will look into further research into this matter, and I will do so in order for us all to create not only tomorrow's schools, which is interesting of course, but also tomorrow's society. And I want this society to be based not entirely on quantity, but on quality. Thank you very, very much for your attention. This has, as always, been a presentation of MobileVideo, Paul Goinke, and myself, Hans Dorsch, White Closet.